It seems like Capcom and SNK have been collaborating a lot lately, to say the very least. And it's something that has a lot of people excited because the last time Capcom and SNK really collaborated in relation to high profile fighting games was like the early 2000s. Um, I feel like with Street Fighter 6, we're supposed to be getting SNK characters like Terry Bogard and Mai Shiranui, who are eventually going to be playable characters via DLC. And a lot of people feel like that's being done because Street Fighter 6, which came out this past year in 2023, it didn't sell quite as much as people thought it would, or as much as Capcom thought it would. I think it did somewhere around 3 mil in terms of sales, and a lot of people feel like with all the hype that the game has gotten and seeing how much Street Fighter V had sold prior to its release back in 2016, Street Fighter 6 probably should have sold more than it did within a couple of months, and that doesn't seem to be the case. Now, we know that Street Fighter 6 was considered to be like the top fighting game of 2023. I think it won Best Fighting Game of the Year at the Game Awards. And I believe SNK is supposed to be releasing a brand new Fatal Fury game next year. I believe sometime in April 2025, and it's supposed to be utilizing the Unreal Engine 4 and all that stuff. And it's pretty cool that SNK is bringing back the Fatal Fury series. But I'm looking at these collaborations with Capcom and SNK, and it makes me think whether or not we're going to be getting a Capcom versus SNK 3 sometime in the future. Now, you look at the Capcom versus SNK series. I believe it started back in 1999, and the last one we got was SNK versus Capcom 2, which came out back in 2001. And and those games were actually they were pretty good for its time, but if you look back at it now, you could see that basically reused sprites and graphics for characters were included heavily in the game. But at the same time, it was very fun because it was a crossover for different characters from different universes all in one game. It's something that people had been wanting to see all throughout the 90s. It was a game that a lot of people the first game, SNK versus Capcom, which came out back in 1999, it was a game a lot of people didn't expect to see. Um, SNK versus Capcom 2001 was like a step up from its prequel, and I believe we got SVC Chaos, which came out back in 2003, and that's an underrated arcade classic that doesn't get as much credit as it deserves. And it's probably because that game was notoriously more difficult than it had any business being. But but yeah, I mean, I do feel like Capcom versus SNK 3 is a real possibility, seeing how Capcom and SNK are, doing business together once again. Because I don't think we're going to get a Marvel versus Capcom game anytime soon. Because Marvel versus Capcom Infinite from 2017 ended up being a flop for the most part. I think it broke over a mil in terms of sales, but if you look at the commercial success Marvel vs. Capcom 3 had back in 2011 onwards, I mean, like Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite was a game that it seems like a lot of people want to forget even happened. But if we do get a Capcom versus SNK 3 sometime in the future, it'd be cool to have some kind of story opposed to it just being an arcade fighting game with a bunch of random characters, because I feel like we live in a day and age where when you have a video game, there has to be more than just basic gameplay. There has to be a story. There has to be something a bit extra to add to the overall replay value of the game itself. I just don't know what the story would be for a potential Capcom versus SNK 3 game in the future. I don't even know if Capcom and SNK has had any talks in terms of making that happen in the future, but it's something that people have waited over 20 years to see, and it's something that I feel would actually be a bigger attraction now than it would have been 20 years ago. And the reason I say that is because you look at You look at the Street Fighter series, you look at the King of Fighters series, you look at the Fatal Fury series. They're way more popular now than they were um, over 2 decades ago, or more popular than they were back in the '90s. And I do feel um, that a game like this is something that would break the internet, something that would trend on Twitter. It's something that would get a lot of people talking, and I feel like the hype and anticipation would make people want to purchase the game, because you look at how Capcom left the Marvel vs. Capcom series on the shelf for quite some time, because Marvel vs. Capcom 2 came out back in 2000. We didn't get a sequel until 2011, and honestly, the sequel was something that exceeded many people's expectations. And honestly, I feel like the wait and the anticipation was one of the many things that contributed to its overall success, along with the fact that pretty much the series got an overhaul in terms of graphics, in terms of look, in terms of aesthetics. It was beautiful, and maybe that's something that needs to be done with Capcom versus SNK, if we do get a Capcom versus SNK 3 at all. But I know that there's definitely certain communities online that has expressed interest in possibly seeing a Capcom versus SNK 3 in the future. But I'm not exactly sure whether or not Capcom plans on making that a reality, whether or not they feel it's worth its time, because obviously they got bigger and more important franchises that they're focusing on, like with the Resident Evil series and Monster Hunter series. So, I mean, who knows? I mean, I do feel that I do feel like Street Fighter and King of Fighters is popular enough, and it's known by the casual audience to a point where like a potential collaboration would definitely garner mainstream appeal to some extent. But I don't think it's going to do any. I don't think it would do any, ridiculous numbers like, do 10 mil or anything like that in terms of sales. But I do feel like it's something that can easily break 2 or 3 million if done right, and I feel like if they had like the right budget, the right execution, a roster that people would be satisfied with, I do feel that potential Capcom versus SNK 3 game is something that would be profitable for Capcom, and it's something that would make a lot of people happy if it does indeed become a reality.